The neon lights flickered outside a small, dimly lit bar on the outskirts of town. The kind of place where regulars drank in silence, and strangers were greeted with suspicious glances. The air was thick with the scent of cheap beer, cigarette smoke, and sweat. It wasn't exactly the kind of place where one would expect to find a world champion boxer, but that's exactly where Mike Tyson found himself that evening. Tyson had never been one for extravagant outings. Despite his legendary status, he preferred the simplicity of a quiet drink in an unassuming place. Wearing a plain black hoodie and jeans, he looked like just another traveler stopping by for a drink. His face, though recognizable to millions, was partially concealed under the dim lighting, and most of the patrons were too caught up in their own conversations to notice him. He made his way to the bar counter, his heavy footsteps barely making a sound against the wooden floor. The bartender, a burly man in his 50s with a salt and pepper beard, glanced at him and nodded. "What'll it be?" the bartender asked. "Whiskey, neat," Tyson replied, his voice calm yet firm. As the bartender poured his drink, the sound of loud, raucous laughter erupted from a booth near the back. A group of 5 men, local thugs known for causing trouble, were sitting together, guzzling beers and jeering at people who walked by. Their leader, a stocky man with a tattoo-covered arm and a shaved head, Raul, had been eyeing Tyson ever since he walked in. "Hey, look at this guy," Raul sneered, elbowing one of his friends. "Doesn't he look like he don't belong here?" His gang turned their heads toward Tyson, smirking. The men were part of a local gang, feared by many in the area for their violent tempers and racist attitudes. They had made it a habit to intimidate anyone they saw as an outsider. Tyson, unbothered, took a sip of his whiskey. He had been in 1,000 places like this before. He knew the type, loud, arrogant, and always looking for a fight they couldn't win. But Raul wasn't one to back down. He stood up, cracking his knuckles, and sauntered toward the bar. "Yo, gringo," he said, addressing Tyson with a mocking tone. "You lost? This ain't a place for tourists." Tyson didn't even turn his head. He simply exhaled, sipping his drink again. His silence only fueled Raul's anger. One of Raul's friends, Luis, chuckled and added, "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue." Tyson finally turned his head slightly, locking eyes with Raul. His gaze was calm but piercing, the look of a man who had seen and done things that these men couldn't even imagine. "I'm just here for a drink," Tyson said, his voice low but full of power. Raul scoffed. "A drink? In my bar? You better show some respect, man." The bartender, who had been wiping down the counter, immediately sensed trouble brewing. He knew exactly who Tyson was, and he also knew that these men had no idea who they were messing with. "Raul, let it go," the bartender warned. "You don't want this fight." Raul laughed. "Oh yeah? And why not?" The bartender hesitated. He wanted to tell Raul the truth, but he also knew that sometimes people had to learn lessons the hard way. Luis, emboldened by his friend, decided to take things further. He grabbed a half-empty beer bottle from the table and tossed it onto the floor near Tyson's feet, the glass shattering upon impact. "Oops," Luis said mockingly. "Guess we made a mess. Maybe you should clean it up." "Huh," Tyson sighed, placing his glass down. He turned fully to face Raul and his gang. His posture was relaxed, but his presence was overwhelming. "You don't want to do this," Tyson said simply. His voice was calm but carried a weight to it, like a lion warning a foolish predator. Raul smirked. "Oh? And what are you gonna do about it, huh? Fight me?" Tyson just stared at him. There was no arrogance, no threat, just a quiet confidence that sent chills down the bartender's spine. The other patrons in the bar had started to take notice. Some whispered among themselves, their eyes darting between Tyson and the gang. A few of them had recognized him now, but they stayed silent, curious to see how this would unfold. Raul, mistaking Tyson's silence for fear, took another step closer. "That's what I thought," he spat. "You ain't got nothing to say. You're just another scared." Before he could finish his sentence, he shoved Tyson's shoulder, trying to provoke him. For a split second, everything in the bar went silent. Tyson's eyes darkened. He had given them a chance to walk away. The bartender's heart pounded in his chest. He knew what was about to happen. The gang had no idea that they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. A thick silence settled over the bar like a heavy fog. Every patron in the room sat frozen, eyes darting between the gang of thugs and the man they had just foolishly provoked. The bartender swallowed hard, gripping the edge of the counter. He knew what was coming. Raoul, unaware of the storm he had just unleashed, smirked, mistaking Tyson's stillness for hesitation. "Yeah, that's what I thought," he sneered. "You're just another washed-up punk who—" Before he could finish, Tyson moved. It wasn't an aggressive lunge. It wasn't even a punch. He simply took a slow step forward. But that one step carried a force, a presence, an unshakable dominance that sent a primal chill through Raoul's bones. For the first time, he hesitated. Tyson's voice, deep and composed, cut through the air like a razor blade. "I gave you a chance to walk away." His tone wasn't loud. It wasn't threatening. It was simply a statement of fact. But to those who knew him, to those who understood the terrifying reality of what he could do, it was a warning. Raoul laughed nervously, trying to maintain his tough guy act. But his gang wasn't so sure anymore. Luis, the one who had smashed the beer bottle, took a small step back. Another thug glanced around the room, suddenly aware of the growing unease among the other patrons. The bartender, still gripping the counter, muttered under his breath, "Idiots!" Tyson wasn't just a fighter. He was one of the most devastating forces to ever step inside a boxing ring. A man whose punches had shattered bones, whose speed defied logic, whose sheer presence had intimidated some of the toughest fighters in the world. And yet, here he was, standing before a group of low-level thugs who had no idea what kind of destruction they had just invited upon themselves. Raoul, determined to save face, shoved Tyson again. This time, Tyson caught his wrist. The moment their skin connected, Raoul realized his mistake. Tyson's grip was like iron, unmovable, unbreakable. Raoul tried to yank his arm back, but it was like trying to move a mountain. His face twisted in confusion, then fear. Tyson tightened his hold just slightly. Raoul let out a sharp hiss of pain. The gang members stepped forward, but Tyson's eyes flicked to them, a silent warning. None of them dared move. "You like picking fights?" Tyson asked, his voice calm, almost conversational. Raoul gritted his teeth. "Let me go." Tyson didn't. Instead, he squeezed just a little more. Raoul's knees buckled slightly as a sharp pain shot up his arm. He realized then, this wasn't a man he could intimidate. This wasn't a fight he could win. "Apologize," Tyson said. Raoul's pride flared. "Screw you." Tyson exhaled. His grip tightened again. A sharp pop echoed in Raoul's wrist. Not quite a break, but enough to make his eyes widen in agony. The bartender winced. Tyson was holding back, but just barely. The entire bar was dead silent. Everyone was watching, waiting. Finally, Raoul's breathing turned ragged. He had no choice. "I'm sorry," he muttered through clenched teeth. Tyson didn't let go. "Louder." Raoul hesitated. Tyson's eyes narrowed. Raoul felt his wrist tighten again. "I said I'm sorry," he practically shouted. Tyson held him there for a moment longer, as if deciding whether the apology was good enough. Then, just as suddenly as he had grabbed him, Tyson released his grip. Raoul stumbled back, cradling his wrist. His face was a mixture of pain, rage, and something else, humiliation. Luis and the other gang members looked between Raoul and Tyson, unsure of what to do. For the first time, Raoul, the self-proclaimed toughest guy in the bar, had backed down. Tyson turned back toward his drink, picking it up like nothing had happened. But Raoul wasn't done. Not yet. Humiliated and enraged, he reached behind his back. The bartender's heart stopped. He saw it before anyone else did. The flash of steel. A knife. Raoul pulled it from his belt and lunged forward. But Tyson was faster. Much faster. Before Raoul even realized what was happening, his own momentum was used against him. Tyson sidestepped at the last possible second, grabbing Raoul's wrist and twisting it downward in a single, fluid motion. Crack! Raoul screamed as the knife clattered to the floor. His wrist, already sore from earlier, had been dislocated in an instant. The other gang members jumped back, horrified. Luis grabbed the edge of the table for support, his face pale. Raoul collapsed to his knees, clutching his limp wrist, his face twisted in agony. Tyson, still calm, collected, and entirely unfazed, took one step closer. "I told you," he said, his voice low, unshakable. "You didn't want this fight." Raoul's breath came in shallow gasps. He looked up at Tyson, not with hatred but with fear. Tyson turned toward the bartender, who still looked stunned. "You should probably call an ambulance," Tyson said casually. The bartender blinked. Then, after a moment, nodded. Raoul said nothing. His gang members? They were already backing toward the door. They wanted no part of this. Tyson took one last sip of his whiskey, placed some cash on the bar, and turned to leave. The entire bar watched in stunned silence as he walked out. But before he reached the door, he stopped. Without looking back, he said just loud enough for everyone to hear, "Next time, pick your fights wisely." Then, without another word, he disappeared into the night. The night air outside the bar was cool and still, but inside, the tension was suffocating. Raoul lay on the floor, cradling his dislocated wrist, his face twisted in pain and humiliation. The other gang members stood frozen, unsure whether to attack or run. Tyson, however, was calm. He had dealt with real fighters, champions, warriors. These guys? They were nothing. Still, Tyson knew how men like Raoul thought. Ego, pride, those were their greatest weaknesses. Raoul wasn't going to let this go. And sure enough, "Get him!" Raoul roared, despite the pain in his wrist. The gang hesitated for just a second. Then, as if emboldened by their leader's cry, they moved. 3 men charged at Tyson. The bartender, still standing behind the counter, muttered, "They have no idea what they just did." The first thug swung a wild punch. Tyson sidestepped effortlessly, his years of training making the movement second nature. He didn't just dodge, he countered. His right hand shot forward like lightning. Crack! A single punch to the ribs sent the thug collapsing to the ground, gasping for air. The second thug was faster. He came at Tyson with a broken beer bottle, swinging wildly. Tyson stepped inside his reach, grabbed the man's wrist, and twisted hard. The thug let out a scream as the bottle fell from his hand. Tyson followed up with a devastating elbow to the jaw. Thud! The second thug hit the ground, unconscious. The third guy hesitated. He saw what had just happened. Tyson gave him a look, a silent warning. "Walk away." The thug made his decision. He ran. That left only Raoul. He struggled to his feet, cradling his limp wrist. His breathing was heavy, his face drenched in sweat. Tyson walked toward him. Raoul, in one last desperate move, lunged. Tyson didn't even blink. His left hook came out of nowhere. A brutal, bone-rattling punch that connected clean with Raoul's jaw. Boom! The impact was thunderous. Raoul's head snapped back. His body went stiff, then limp. He hit the floor like a sack of bricks. A cold. The bar fell completely silent. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then the bartender whistled under his breath. Damn! Tyson exhaled slowly, rolled his shoulders, and turned back toward the counter. Like nothing had happened. He picked up his drink and took a sip. The remaining gang members didn't wait around. They grabbed Raoul's unconscious body and ran. Tyson didn't watch them go. He simply placed some cash on the counter and looked at the bartender. "Sorry about the mess." The bartender let out a short laugh. "Mess? Man, that was the best thing I've seen in years." Tyson gave a small grin. Then, without another word, he walked out. As the bar door swung shut behind him, the bartender shook his head. Legend. The night had turned eerily silent as Mike Tyson stepped out of the bar. The air was crisp, and the distant hum of traffic was the only sound that filled the streets. Inside, the bartender and a few remaining patrons were still processing what had just happened. Raul and his gang had been utterly humiliated. The undefeated world champion had taken them down without breaking a sweat. But this wasn't just another bar fight. This was a message. Two of Raul's men struggled to lift their unconscious leader, his head lolling to the side, swollen and bruised. One of them kept glancing over his shoulder, as if afraid Tyson would follow. "Forget it," one of them muttered. "We need to get out of here." No one argued. They carried Raul out, dragging his limp body through the back alley, disappearing into the darkness. Inside the bar, the remaining patrons erupted into hushed whispers. "Did you see that? I swear. Tyson hit that guy, and he went stiff as a board before he even hit the ground. I told you, man. That's Iron Mike. What the hell were those idiots thinking?" The bartender wiped down the counter with a smirk. "I hope they learned their lesson." It didn't take long before flashing red and blue lights painted the dimly lit street outside. The police had arrived. A tall officer stepped out of his cruiser, glancing at the shaken bartender. "Got a call about a fight. What happened?" The bartender chuckled, motioning toward the broken tables and shattered glass. "Mike Tyson happened." The officer's eyebrows shot up. "Tyson? As in the boxer?" "Yep. A bunch of lowlifes came in looking for trouble. Picked a fight with the wrong guy." The officer glanced at his partner, suppressing a grin. "I almost feel bad for him." They took statements, but it was clear that Tyson had acted in self-defense. No one was pressing charges. If anything, most of the witnesses seemed grateful that he had put the thugs in their place. "Tell Tyson we said thanks," one of the officers joked before getting back into the cruiser. "Doubt we'll be seeing those guys around for a while." By the next morning, the entire incident had gone viral. Someone in the bar had recorded the fight and uploaded it online. The video showed everything: Raul's arrogant challenge, his threats, and then Tyson's lightning-fast takedown. The internet exploded. Mike Tyson just reminded everyone why he's the GOAT. Those guys had no idea who they were messing with. Iron Mike at 57 still knocking fools out. Sports analysts and former fighters chimed in. Even celebrities reacted. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson tweeted, "Note to self, never mess with Mike Tyson. Ever." Tyson himself remained quiet on social media, as always, but deep down he knew his legend had only grown stronger. Back in a rundown hideout on the outskirts of the city, Raul sat in silence. His face was swollen, his pride shattered. His men sat around him equally defeated. They had built their reputation on fear, on making people tremble when they walked into a room. But now they were the joke. One of the younger gang members hesitated before speaking. "Maybe we should just move to another city, man." Raul clenched his jaw. He wanted revenge, desperately, but deep down he knew there was nothing he could do. Mike Tyson wasn't just a fighter. He was a force of nature. Meanwhile, Tyson had moved on. He had no interest in the internet storm or the praise. To him, it was just another night, another situation where he had to defend himself. He boarded a flight the next morning, heading back home. As he settled into his seat, a flight attendant approached him, smiling. "Excuse me, Mr. Tyson." He looked up. "I just wanted to say, what you did back there was incredible. Those guys had it coming." Tyson gave a small nod, his voice calm. "I just don't like bullies." The flight attendant grinned. "Neither do we." As the plane took off, Tyson closed his eyes, letting the world talk while he moved forward, just as he always had.